We're happy inside. Welcome to our part two of the series funded by the MillerKnoll Foundation. In case you came to the first one, perhaps you didn't. Regardless, this is going to go into more detail in and around street tree care and thinking about the specifics of stewarding trees, getting involved in your neighborhood, and so on and so forth. So we really just want to thank MillerKnoll for their generosity and care in prioritizing this topic and sacredly. So, starting off, I want to just bring your attention to the screen in front. So you can see very clearly that we've got on the left here, and I think you can see my mouse, you can see trash bags, and this is kind of what we're used to. This is a street tree before being cared for, and then down here after. The same on the right. You can see it's kind of overgrown with weeds. There's some leaves on the bottom right. Still, just taken care of. That's it. Just some aeration and simple care, and you can see a world of difference. So, let's get into it. Our agenda today, we're going to go over who we are. I'm really lucky to be joined by my colleague L'Oreal, and my colleague Gail Lopez will be joining us for Q&A later. We will recap our first session, kind of go over some of the basics that we discussed, and then we'll get into more specifics around planning a street tree care event, using the New York City tree map, year-round stewardship, so thinking about the seasons and how care is affected specifically through each season. We'll go over tree bed gardening, bulb selection and planting, watering, protecting your tree, and then go over some really incredible organizations in the city that can offer support in various ways and give you links to all of this. We'll end with resources and contact information for ourselves, and then open it up to a Q&A for everyone to join, just so that everyone knows, don't worry about taking vigorous notes or screenshots. We will be sharing the PDF of this PowerPoint presentation, but also of the recording with everyone. So this is being recorded. Okay. So if you can hold your questions to the end, if you want to write them in the chat, we can revisit them at the end as you're comfortable. So let's kick off who we are. So my name is Annalisa Zausner-Manis. I feel really lucky to be able to work on this team at Big Reuse. Compost Education and Application is the current name of our team. I've been lucky to work with my colleague Gil Lopez for the last few years stewarding this work, and I'm extra lucky to have been joined by my newest colleague, L'Oreal. L'Oreal, I'd love if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, folks. My name is L'Oreal Crowder. I started my tree stewardship journey in 2012 and present day have joined Big Reuse, where I work with community partners and schools and organizations to host street tree care events in specific districts and with community members and such. So thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, L'Oreal. L'Oreal has been an incredible addition to our team, and we're really lucky together to be both in the field, behind the scenes, giving workshops like this in person, virtually, and then, of course, all taking care of our actual trees. So that's our work. And we are very lucky to be funded to do this work from discretionary funds through council members across Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, and now also the Bronx. So if you are curious about that, again, feel free to reach out to us later. We'd love to engage with you, community groups, members, and kind of see where, if we can't help, perhaps one of our partner organizations or colleagues can. So that's who we are. Let's get into what we talked about in workshop one. Workshop one went over three, really, if I could generalize it, three things. We talked about why trees, basic street tree care, and then tools and supplies. So this picture is actually in my neighborhood. A very good friend of mine took it, actually. This is, for those of you in Brooklyn might be familiar, what a lot of our trees look like, and we definitely take for granted and possibly notice, but possibly don't. I think often we see the trash, but we don't necessarily think about the larger impact and what that means for the trees themselves. So why trees? We talked about combined sewer overflow mitigation. We talked about moderating the urban heat island effect and just addressing poor urban air quality. Taking care of trees helps in a very cyclical and larger way, tapping into other systems and our community as a whole. So we discussed that. We also went over the 5 steps. First being removing trash, and you can see here it's quite sweet. So on the top right, this is removing trash and then weeds. You can see just from this one bed how much was caught up in there, right? Because when the weeds are growing like that, it makes it easy for trash to get caught inside. So we talked about removing trash and then, of course, weeds. I think at this point they're just beginning the weeding of the tree bed. We then talked about aerating. So top left, you can see some of the hand tools used, which I'll show you in the next slide. And then applying the compost and mulch material. So usually we dump it and then spread it. You can see there's the space left. Really, really important not to put this mulch right up against that tree trunk, as it could be more harmful than good. And then over here on the right, we talked about sweeping and just making sure that we're cleaning the surrounding areas. I always say it's really good because it gives us an opportunity to go back and make sure we didn't leave anything behind. And then just any special considerations that you have to work with, thinking about stewarding as a community service, model, but also an action. So calling 311, following up with parks if it's a young tree, things like that. And these are some of the tools that we discussed using. We do use hand tools, but also enjoy larger tools just to differentiate kind of what we're trying to do and what kind of tree bed we're getting into. Because as I think everyone's probably familiar with if you're attending this, there are a lot of different kinds, a lot of different kinds of beds, and the condition varies dramatically. So these are the hand tools. Uh, High regard for this one over here, the hand weeder. It's a very nice one if you have like very, very stubborn weeds. So we are going to jump into kind of the meat, so to speak, the protein of this workshop and start with talking about planning a street tree care event. And we're looking at this as, okay, it's your first time, you haven't necessarily done this before, maybe you've done it individually or as part of a group, but you want to plan your own. So these are kind of our top 5 recommendations. There are tools that you may or may not be aware of and have access to, and again, highly recommend. The first thing is definitely thinking about connecting with the CB. CB stands for Community Board. So a Community Board announcement, connecting with them, flyering in the neighborhood, of course, using online resources, local newsletters, and reaching out directly to community groups, schools, civic, and religious organizations. I think L'Oreal can say again, we work with so many different religious spaces, schools, community groups. It varies dramatically. The second thing is making sure that you organize a list to collect RSVPs and flyers to distribute on these social newsletter hub areas. It's really important because often, again, part of this, if you're interested in creating a street tree care event, is probably also that you're interested in kind of continuing that work. So really being able to create a network and be in touch with each other. So as you create that RSVP list, we're all holding each other accountable. The third thing is to make sure that you're in touch the day before with different things that might be needed for the event based on temperature. When we're doing events in the summer, as we all experience this summer, we had some really, really hot and humid days. So just reminding people to bring water bottles, and if you are providing anything for them, share that so that they are aware and they come prepared. Also, clothing. I always remind students, like wearing those brand new white kicks, probably not the time. Probably not the time. So just getting ready to get as dirty as you want to get. So, of course, the last thing, or not the last, but second to last, is getting general contact information for interest, kind of again, if you're going into the direction of trying to create a group yourself, a community group or an organization, to make sure that you're creating some kind of listserv or group for ongoing volunteer information. I cannot emphasize this enough. Make it as easy for yourself as possible. Do not try to recreate the wheel and do something inventive and, oh my gosh, first time ever. Do something that you know will work for you. And that can be as simple as just emailing a group of people. Doesn't need to be fancy. Keep it simple. And the last and possibly one of the most important things is, figure out what organizations, and we'll talk about this later in the presentation, but think about what organizations are already active in the waste and kind of environmental space in your community, and think about how you can team up with them, work together, and possibly they can help you, again, not only come themselves, but maybe they can share with their community members. It's a great way to just increase the outreach potential. So, all of that being said, these are just kind of the step by step what you want. That's in terms of getting your group together. Now we're talking about the actual resources. So, you definitely need to have a leader. I think a lot of times in this space, I meet so many people, and I myself have been in that position where I'm like, I'm just helping coordinate. I'm not a leader. The truth of the matter is we need leaders. We need people to step up, and a lot of people do end up doing the majority of the work. So whether that's one group member or a few, designating that person or those people as leads also helps the volunteers coming understand and know who to reach out to and how to follow up if they're interested. Selecting trees for the event. You might have a certain block in mind. It's really important to also just think about the trees you want and the population. I always emphasize that if you are working with young ones, I personally prefer to stay on a city block, aka not cross a street. I think it's really important to keep that in mind if you're working with youth, and depending again on if you'll have families or who's going to be attending your event. Um, Also, as you're planning and selecting those trees, we'll talk about the tree map later. It's really also important for you to plan for a few additional volunteers. People sometimes work a lot quicker than you expect, and you want to be able to have a plan of where you're going. In the same breath, you need to be able to examine these trees yourself. You can look on the tree map, but there's nothing like being able to go outside and see, because these aren't necessarily advertised in all the same ways, and we're not all, tuned into the same channels. We might not always know. So we could think that a tree is in really bad condition and then say, "Oh, I'm going to go out in 2 days when I have a free moment." And then you go out and it's like, "Oh, someone just cared for it." I mean, that's the dream, right? That's what we would all hope for, but it does in fact happen. Um, so figuring out where you're going to get your supplies, whether those are tools, a lending library, or mulch, compost, figuring out how you're going to get them to the site. There are a fair amount of logistics involved. Hand in hand with those logistics is choosing a clear meeting spot. There are groups. We worked recently, L'Oreal, with a group on the Upper East Side, and they have a cafe. They always meet in that cafe. They have a relationship with the owners of the cafe. They're comfortable with it. If you are having an event, especially if it's a larger event, please check in with the place. If you are planning in the winter, especially meeting inside, please check in and make sure that they're comfortable with a group coming in and that they're ready for it. Otherwise, meeting outside on a corner or at a specific address outside a certain building is definitely the best way to go. Um, and hand in hand with that, definitely thinking about nearest bathrooms, having a first aid kit on hand. Again, they seem obvious as I'm saying them, but they're not necessarily so obvious unless you're ready and thinking about it. So these are, across all ages, everyone needs to access a bathroom at any given time. So it's really important to have that. The last thing is monitoring the weather. More or less our weather can be consistent, but a drizzle is different from a downpour. So making sure that we just got rained out, L'Oreal, this last week. And we thought, okay, maybe it'll just be a drizzle, but then it was like, we're working with kids. And it ended up being a lot more than a drizzle. And just again, setting that rain date as soon as you can and knowing this is the nature of the work. So these are kind of our tried and true procedure, so to speak. Before the event, again, texting or emailing and making sure that you're there early to set up. In the first 20 minutes, I would say even 10, depending on how well you know each other, let everyone introduce themselves and share their experience. This is great not only for building a community, but it's really incredible to learn how much people have done. There are a lot of people who, in my experience, haven't shared voluntarily, and then I know them, and then we're sitting in a group and everyone introduces and they share all this experience. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that you knew all these things. So it's an incredible way to learn about the experience and the background that people have and to tap into that while we're in the field doing the work. If you know that someone's a citizen pruner or that you know that someone has been doing this for a decade, they're going to have a different experience and you can lean on that expertise. You might be the leader, but again, I fall into the category of saying we're all leaders and we're all bringing different experiences. So it's important that we all kind of come prepared in that space. During the event, definitely breaking up, making sure that everyone has necessary gloves and tools. Of course, you've already told everyone where the bathroom is and designated a leader or two. Making sure that, again, whether or not you're talking with young people, but making sure that any sharp objects are, if you are touching them, handled with care. Obviously, you have gloves, and any yard waste is put in a separate bag. Take photos. I cannot say this enough. I'm horrible myself personally. I do not take a lot of photos of myself in the field or when I'm doing work, but it makes such a difference. And it's so easy to get caught up in the work that it's really hard to remember. But really, you will thank yourself later, especially, seeing this journey and seeing the reminders that will pop up in your email or your phone with a sweet photo. It does make a difference. At the end, of course, thank everyone for coming. Decide if you want to do a follow-up activity of any kind, taking a group picture and sharing it on those same networks where you advertised it. I personally love taking before and after pictures of the actual trees, just because it's such a great way for people to see really hands-on what they're getting into and what they've done. It really is such a dramatic visual. And then last but not least, you're going to upload the trees that you cared for on the New York City tree map. And if interested, gauge how much people enjoyed it and see if they're keen to go ahead and do another event. So again, this is kind of the run of show, so to speak, for the day of. So I mentioned the tree map at the end. I'm going to go ahead and give you a sample of it now. The New York City tree map, for those who aren't familiar, is an incredible resource. These are screenshots from the website accessed via a telephone. And so essentially you can create a profile, you can join or associate any group, create a group of your own, and update your tree activity. It's a great way to not only report issues directly to parks and not worry about 311, but also to see a history of care. So here, for example, you would just enter the activity date, duration. It's quite simple. This is what it looks like live. You can click on any of these green shades of green and then some brown dots. It will tell you the tree species, the size. It gives so many pieces of information. And then here on the right, you can see the history. So this is just, again, saying this was a specific event that we did. And you can see on September 22nd, you can just check these boxes and it populates like this. And I'm not sure I have the live view right now, but I can definitely share it with you at the end during Q&A or when you have this PDF, you'll just get access to a live view. Okay. Oh, thank you. And L'Oreal just shared the actual map in the chat. So if you want to browse that while listening, more than welcome. Thanks, L'Oreal. Okay. So that's the tree map. Next, I'm going to talk about year-round stewardship and seasonal care. One of the most, I'm sorry, before I even start and change the slide, the most popular thing people say is, oh yeah, I want to do an event. Let's do it on Earth Week. Let's do it during Earth Month. L'Oreal, how many times do you think we hear this?
Quite often, very
Yeah.
much, yes.
All the time. People are always saying that to us. Or the other thing which we hear, and I don't know, L'Oreal, if you also hear this as much, I'm guessing you do, because I hear it all the time is, oh, it's winter. We can't, it's not time to care for a tree. Yeah, also. It's wild. Year-round stewardship is a thing. It does look a little different, but year-round stewardship is important. So we'll start off talking about fall since we're in fall right now, the end of it, but still. Thinking about September, you're watering usually weekly your trees. You want to remove stakes and ties from any trees that have been in the ground for more than 2 years. 2 years is the period, and some of you already know this, of kind of the beginning of a tree's life, and the most sensitive it is to damage or infection. So it's really important and to very dramatically and regularly check on those trees during those first 2 years. October, you want to water any young evergreens before the ground freezes, and also plant bulbs near the base of the trees, and refresh the mulch around it. This, I know a lot of people were also doing in November because we had such a mild fall, that even if you were doing it up until last week, and I don't even, I think it is quite cold, but I think you could even be putting it in this week. It's quite windy, but you could still be putting in bulbs. And in November, again, continuing before the ground freezes. It's really important just to continue making sure that if you are planting anything, the ground has not frozen yet. Getting into winter, it is a really, really great practice to place holiday tree branches or any other kind of decomposing flowers or plants around the trees to absorb salt and any dog or animal waste, really. You might see it from the holidays after, if people have trees up, but it's also, and that's why I added in the other decomposing flowers and plants, when I did some fall care actually with my father, and he had taken out some annuals that were, really dead and past their time, and he chopped them up a little, ripped them up, and put them around the tree beds. So it was a nice way to kind of protect them, but also take care of what needed to be taken care of. So it's a great practice. In January, you want to continue inspecting trees for disease, insects, vandalism, because trees are more dormant during the time, and there are a lot of different things it's important to do during the winter. It's a high focus time. Also, free mulch at Mulch Fest. For those of you not familiar with Mulch Fest, it's a great program put together by parks where you can bring holiday trees to a location, oftentimes in one of the parks. For us, for me personally, it's by Prospect Park, um, right by the Q station, the Prospect Park Q station. That entrance is usually where you can drop off a tree, but it's quite easy. If you just Google Mulch Fest, you will see a list of locations. And when you either have to bring it live or the drop off spot, they take those and they turn it into mulch and then give back. So it's a great way for you to get free mulch from the city and to really see circular oh my gosh, the circular economy of the life of your holiday tree. Okay, I can't pronounce the word right now, but
Cyclical.
thank you, cyclical. I don't know why it wasn't coming out. Thank you, L'Oreal, the cyclical nature of it. So beautiful. And then in February, again, we're getting ready to get into the spring. There are any dead street trees or anything that is a red flag for you, a park tree that you think needs removal, reach out to 311. You will hear us say this over and over again, 311, 311, 311. It is an incredible way to hold, our agencies and elected officers accountable to doing the work that their department is committed to. There is a log there, and it will definitely be engaged and responded to. So cannot emphasize and my affection for 311 enough. So it's spring, of course. The first thing, plan a spring stewardship event. This is everyone's favorite time to get into planting and to take care of trees and just green areas in general. If there's any winter mulch that has waste, a lot of times at my last presentation, I had someone who said the city just sprays salt all year, like all winter long, even if there's no snow. Um, if you see those salt stains, which we're probably all familiar with from seeing on the sidewalk, if you see it in the tree bed as well, definitely removing that, getting rid of it. It's going to help, and then applying a new ring around the base of the tree to just help take care of it and refresh it and wake that tree up into spring. In April, again, if your trees are planted near the street or sidewalk, they might have some salt on it, even if the ground's still frozen. So just paying attention to the tree itself. And of course, Arbor Day and Earth Day, great holidays to take care of it. I'm not saying that this is not, I'm just saying it's what everyone defers to, and there are many more times. And then, of course, in May, water weekly. If the soil is dry, which it can be, again, climate change is real, so things are changing. But if your soil is dry, use a hand tool, loosen up that soil, and then water it weekly as much as you can. I'll talk about water in a minute. If you are interested in planting small flowers or bulbs around the base of your trees or wildflower seeds, try to do it toward the edge of the bed, as far away from the tree trunk as possible. And please, please, please do not think about planting any flowers in that bed until you know that that tree is healthy and doing a great job on its own. I believe it's obvious. I'm going to say it anyway. If that tree bed is full of roots and you can actually see the root system of the tree, you do not want to be planting flowers or anything there. You cannot. That root system is more important, and cannot really be disturbed if it's coming above ground. That's a tree that really just needs to be taken care of as well as possible. Getting into summer, in June, you really want to make sure you have a thick bed of mulch that's going to help insulate the tree. It's going to hold moisture for it and also protect the bed. If you can, watering it weekly. And again, still checking for weeds. I'm sorry, for insects or disease. This is also one of the times that you're going to start seeing weeds come up. So when they do start to shoot up, try to just pull them as they come. Get rid of them quickly so that they don't get too strong, because they can get pretty hardy. I've gone to some events and had some really tough weeds. July and August, same thing. Again, we know how we feel, and when we're drinking more water, think the trees are working with the same thing. So you want to water them weekly, pull weeds, and inspect for insects and disease. So that's kind of what we're looking at for seasonal care overall. Um, we're also kind of about halfway done. Just for those of you who might have joined later, we're going to be going through the rest of this presentation. We're going to hopefully leave time at the end, about a half hour, for Q&A. My colleague L'Oreal and I will be joined with our colleague Gil Lopez, who will help field some questions and answers for everyone. So, okay, continuing on. I mentioned in the last slide, a lot of people like thinking about planting flowers and bulbs. Let's talk specifically about which ones, because that's a hot topic. So depending on where you are in the city, you might see beds that look like this. And you might think, oh, wow, it's beautiful. I want my tree beds to look like this. The truth of the matter is that a lot of tree beds that look like this are cared for in a very, very regular way. And when I say cared for, I mean that soil is aerated, those plants, the bed is watered, and it is very, very, very much looked after. So the first thing is, before thinking about planting, really thinking about how much care you can give before getting into and deciding to create a watering system. I'm sorry, a gardening system for your tree bed. So the obvious things, of course, right? It is a great way to green your neighborhood. It is an absolute fabulous way. It encourages people to hypothetically not allow their dogs to defecate on that space, but it's also really important before you start to think about the health of your tree itself and the health of the tree bed. Again, if you have, and I'm sorry, I'm realizing now I really should have put this in, but I'm sure we can find this photo easily, and you all know that old tree in your neighborhood that's locked into a very small tree bed and has roots all over. That is not a tree bed that can handle any planting. So really thinking critically and honestly about the tree health before getting into planting. Second, you really want to plant only small annuals or small bulbs, okay, around the tree. And I'll have some recommendations on the next few slides. It shows people that the tree is being cared of. Also, if you notice that the flowers themselves are wilting or not doing well, it's a good indication that your tree itself needs that same love and care. Um, so it's very, very important to do that. Small animals and bulbs will have less of an impact, whereas larger ones will just take up more space, more energy, and more resources. Not to mention that planting them, you can get into the root system. Even if the roots aren't super large, the roots are a very finite system. They can be very, very, very thin, like a string, and digging into the tree bed, you may damage that root system. So you don't want to create a competition in that small bed, and you definitely don't want to, again, hurt the tree itself. Um, I will, again, on the next slides, show some specific bulbs and annuals and even perennials. The number one thing, if you're out in the field and you're like, "Whoo, I don't have the name, I didn't write it down," really, you want to look for phrases like drought tolerant and good for aerospace. Oh my gosh, aeroscaping. You really want to make sure that people can access these plants and that the plants themselves are resilient. It's really, really important. Lastly, because most bulbs need just half a day of sun, because trees often lack leaves in the early spring and bulbs are in bloom, tree beds are really a great, great environment for small bulbs. And again, I'll show you some of those. So speaking specifically to annuals, these are two annuals, and I'm not going to try to pronounce any part of that name. I mean, I guess I could say the American, just English, Star Series and Dwarf Jewel Mix. These are two annual bed selections that we definitely subscribe to. They are very resilient. They are low maintenance. They grow, on the left, you're looking at 9 to 12. On the right, just over a foot, 12 to 18 inches. And they are pretty drought resistant and easy to grow from seed or as a small flower. So they're great selections if you're interested. In terms of bulbs, these are cold hardy bulbs that are really great for New York City. On the right, they're all listed out. This is a beautiful image. It's one of my favorites by Burpee, but I don't know, there's something about it that I really love. It goes into how deep, depending on the bulb, it should be planted, and also gives you an idea of how tall it will bloom, which is really great. The Daffodil Project is linked here, and I think L'Oreal has been so great about dropping everything in the chat, so she'll drop that in the chat as well. The Daffodil Project is a great way to get any kinds of not any kinds, to get daffodil bulbs. The Daffodil Project is really, really cannot speak to it enough. It's free for New Yorkers to really plant daffodils. It's quite straightforward, but encourage you to go ahead, check out the website, and request your daffodil bulbs, usually through a group or small organization. Okay, perennials. Now, some people say never ever plant a perennial in a tree bed. Okay, if again, we're going on everything that we just discussed, the tree is in good health and the tree bed is well taken care of, and you are committed to that continued care. These are four perennial selections that we would recommend. You can see all of them. They do take up a fair amount of space, but they are all kind of safe, so to speak, for tree beds, whether there is a tree in it or not. Now, if you have a tree bed that does not have a tree and you're thinking, what can I plant that, for whatever reason, there can't be a tree planted, perhaps the city won't allow it, or there's new piping, or whatever the issue is, these are a great alternative to greening that space. Again, this will be shared with you. Everyone will have access. So getting into watering and rain gardens as well. Water is obviously, we just were in a drought for almost 2 months. We can appreciate how important it is for our green spaces to have water. There are three things that you might be familiar with. On the left is something called a tree gator. This is not an advertisement for tree gator, but tree gators are a great material, a great product to put around, especially baby trees, young trees. It allows you to fill the water. So this gator, you can see it's kind of empty. It's probably only got some water down at the bottom because it has this crease. You can imagine it ballooned out when it's full of water, and it allows water to slowly get into the ground. A watering can and bucket, these are, the go-to tools in terms of sourcing water. We'll talk about that in a second, but I highly recommend having a watering can or bucket on hand in your apartment, around your apartment, depending on your level of commitment. This is not a mandate by any means, but it is something that's really, really useful in terms of being able to take care of and reuse water, truly, keep it in the cycle. On the right, you'll see a hydrant wrench. Note that, of course, hydrants, you need permits to access hydrants. Usually you can get that through the city directly or some organizations that might have access. You might, be able to talk to your local firehouse, especially again, when you're thinking about those trees and where you're doing an activity, thinking about where there might be a nearby hydrant is a great idea. So it's obvious, but many cities' trees are surrounded by paved surfaces and can't absorb water. So as a result, by aerating our trees, we are giving them an opportunity. If we're aerating that soil regularly, we're giving the trees an opportunity to absorb more water, and they definitely need some help from us. So of course, if there's a spigot where you can access water outside your building, that's ideal. But finding a water source can definitely be a challenge. Community gardens often also have access to either a fire hydrant, or your super local, business may be able to access it. Reach out. Definitely, you have to get social and figure it out. Watering your trees with 15 to 20 gallons once a week between May and October is the dream. In times of a drought, this again came up last week at my conference. People said, we're in a drought, they don't want to be using water. And I actually had some students, eighth graders, who were like, raised his hand and said, oh, well, if you boil, potatoes or pasta, the carbohydrates that are in that water are actually really great for trees. It's true. If you want to, again, going back to what I mentioned before about a bucket, again, depending on your level of commitment, and especially during a drought, but always, when that water goes down the drain, it's gone. But if you want to think about reusing that water and, draining your vegetables or pasta or whatever you're boiling into a bucket and reserving that bucket and bringing it down to your street trees, it has nutrients in it, and that tree is going to be really happy. It's a great way to just, again, recycle that water that you're using before it goes down the drain into another system. Watering it slowly, you want to make sure that there's no runoff. And again, if you're aerating that soil and taking care of the tree bed, you shouldn't have any issues. So, speaking of water going down a drain, I want to just quickly introduce everyone to the idea of rain gardens, which is managed by DEP. DEP is New York City's Department of Environmental Protection. This is their logo right here. You may or may not be familiar with it. Anyone can get training from DEP and become a steward. Gil and L'Oreal and myself, we actually went through the stewardship, gosh, I think earlier this fall, or maybe it was at the end of the summer. It was incredible. It was a little rainy day, but I learned so much, and now we're going to share it with you. Rain gardens look a little bit like, I'm saying I didn't know beforehand. They look a lot like street trees. You might not recognize them or think, anything of it, but the truth of the matter is they look very, very similar. There are just some differences, and I'll bring your attention to now. On the left, you can see here how there are stones right along the curb, and I'll talk about that later. You'll also see these, which I'll talk about later, and then this down here, this blue kind of sticker that says NYC Rain Garden. That's definitely a newer version. I've passed some rain gardens that are definitely more of a silvery white just because they've been stuck on there for years and they faded. But rain gardens are a kind of a different beast. It is really important to not add compost or mulch to rain gardens. You can check out again this page and research it on your own. Go to DEP, get the training yourself. But rain gardens have to and live under a little bit of a different situation. You can see on the right the amount of trash that's collected in rain gardens. So taking care of the rain garden, and this is winter, that's snow behind it. Taking care of a rain garden is definitely just as important in stewarding it. That stewardship goes directly through DEP. There are 2 levels that you can register for depending on your availability and commitment to rain gardens. But it is different than street tree care. Really, I'm sure I'm being repetitive, but can't emphasize that enough. On the left, you'll see again, I'm hoping that you're all noting the pebbles here, the stones, right, against the curb. Again, it's to help the water infiltrate. If you add any kind of other material and it gets in, it's going to just make it harder for the water to flow down. So really, really, again, do not add compost or mulch to rain gardens. On the left, you can see DEP volunteers and workers working together to just do some gardening because yes, there are trees in some rain gardens and there are, of course, specific plants as well. So this will be shared with you at a future date. I want to just bring your attention to the outlets. You can see 1 and 2. If the rain garden's large enough, it will have 2. It'll have an inlet and an outlet. If it's small, it'll just have 1. This is a great quick way to identify that it's a rain garden and not just a street tree. Okay, so those are the inlets and outlets. The stone strip is just the curb. The plants, again, all of the rain gardens have plants and grasses that are very carefully selected, not only to survive, but one of the interesting things that we learned when we were there. And L'Oreal, by the way, let me know if at any point you want to add anything, because I know we nerded out on this together, was that they didn't want us to, sorry. There were some larger bushes that hadn't been pruned in a while. And while we were at the training, our leader was taking notes and saying, this needs to be pruned. A huge part of rain gardens is that they need to be able to look over onto the street. They cannot block visual access. So aside from the tree, none of the bushes should be larger than kind of waist level or probably head level for a small child walking. So really important to keep in mind. There are tree guards around all DEP rain gardens to not only protect them from people, but also animals. And then, of course, when the beds are big enough, trees are planted. So difference between a rain garden and tree bed is really important. So Let's talk about tree protection, and we look like we're right on time. So the tree guards, I know this is not the best picture, but tree guards are a great way to protect your tree bed. They can be cost prohibitive at times, but there are really great resources out there and a plethora of different ways that you can procure or try to procure a tree guard. Please just remember that to install a tree guard in a tree bed, you must have a permit. And to go through that process, you can see the email at the bottom of the screen, centralforestry@parks.nyc.gov. You cannot just install your own tree guard. Please don't. It would be a waste of time and money and energy because if you do not have the permit, there is a chance that it would be removed, and that is really just heartbreaking, like absolutely heartbreaking. Tree guards, of course, help cars, when you open your car door from hitting the tree, and from people stepping into the bed. It also keeps bicycles from being locked around trees, which could actually hurt and infect the tree, wound it, and make it susceptible to other injuries. Prevents or deters dogs or animals from getting into that tree bed. It, of course, looks nice. It shows that people are invested in it, gives a little signal of, hey, that's my tree. There is the New York City Tree Trust, and you can have a guard installed in front of your property. There's the number right here, 212-360-TREE. So you can definitely reach out to them. But again, you'd really just want to try to protect your tree by all means necessary, and tree guards are a great way. The most traditional ones we have in the city are steel, they're metal, but there are now new models that are wood or plastic, so there are a lot of options. I skipped my agenda, but we're going to get into kind of protection. I guess we're in the theme of protection. So tree guards are one mode. Now just talking about spotted lanternflies. If you are not familiar with it, this is an invasive species. This is something you definitely want to protect your green infrastructure from. If you see it at any of its lifestyle cycles, you can click again on the link we're providing below for more information and resources. But if you're seeing it in any of these stages, you want to really be able to get rid of them, so that you are protecting your species of tree or greens. These are some more just invasive species. The emerald ash borer, EAB. It's a beetle. It was native to Asia, but in 2002, it was found in Michigan, and since then has been found in Canada and all over the place. So it's typically on this ash tree, but it can be found anywhere. So just making sure, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do want to draw your attention, if you haven't already looked on the right of the screen, specifically at what kind of symptoms of, I've spoken a lot about trees being injured or not healthy, but just having a visual of it's really important. And if you look on the right, you can see epicormic branching. Please note, some people are like, oh, I have a tree and it's growing out of just one or two isn't necessarily epicormic branching, but these are things that you definitely want to be looking for. Woodpecker damage in the city, maybe not as much, but dieback, bark splits, and epicormic branching. If you see it starting again, these are things to report and definitely to keep an eye on because it could be a sign of infestation. And you definitely want to make sure that your tree is not under any unnecessary stress. So, we've almost made it. Now, ending, I want to talk about what we're calling tremendous organizations. Honey, I know, I know. We want to focus on organizations that can actually help you do all of this work, right? Because it's easy for me to sit here behind a screen and say, oh, this is great, and this is great, and this is great. But, if you're not in the field and you're, just curious, how can I do this? Here are the organizations that really can help. First of all, L'Oreal, myself, Gil, we are at your disposal. My email address is at the end of this. By all means, send me an email. I'm currently on vacation, but I will respond to your email as soon as possible. L'Oreal and Gil as well. And these organizations all really do a lot. So I'm not going to talk about big reviews. I'm going to talk about all of these partners of ours. We'll start with Million Trees New York. A lot of you may be familiar with this because it started back in 2007 with Bloomberg. If you don't remember, it was part of Plan YC and completed in 2015 with the goal achieved. I speak a lot about this. I really do believe in planting trees. I also really believe in taking care of planted trees. I think it's very important that we're planting trees in communities and with partners who are aware and can steward and help care for them to ensure their lifespan and health. Just planting them is like ticking a check mark. And I think we need to be really intentional with where we do this and how we do it. They do have a tree steward program where you can adopt a tree. They have lots of workshops. Again, you can check out their stewardships calendar, and you can also request a street tree through them. So a great initiative through NYC Parks and also NYRP, which we'll talk about in a minute. Trees New York. Trees New York, incredible, incredible program. They are working to plant, preserve, and protect New York City's urban forest. Again, kind of what I spoke to before, really speaking with intention and putting intention behind just planting, but also talking about preserving and protecting. Since being founded, they have trained over 13,500 citizen pruners and 9,000 youth, which is incredible. If you are interested in the Citizen Pruners course, Trees New York is your place to go. They offer that for any New Yorker. They also can offer you curb your dog signs. They have lots of information on tree guards and great education resources for K to 12, but also youth in general, in addition to the Young Urban Foresters internship. So highly, highly recommend this, depending on your interests, but another great organization. Tremendous. Coming back to NYRP, if you remember a few slides back, A Million Trees is not a coalition, excuse me, a partnership of parks and NYRP. So NYRP partners with local communities, public agencies, private sector, and they do a lot for public open spaces. They actually own and operate 52 community gardens across the 5 boroughs, which is a lot of land, and they steward more than 80 acres of parkland in northern Manhattan. So it's pretty incredible. They distribute thousands of free trees every year and build almost 24 new gardens every year. So again, if you're interested in looking into free trees or tree giveaways that happen usually in the spring and fall, all 5 boroughs, NYRP is the place to go. Parks. Parks has an incredible super steward program. L'Oreal, I'm not sure if you've done it. Gil and I both did it. We actually did it together. L'Oreal also did it. It's a great way. Again, anyone can do it. It's training for any New York City resident on tree care. A lot of probably what you've already gone through and definitely has been alluded to in this presentation. You can also lead your own events and other, volunteer events through this Super Steward program. You could also apply for mini grants. They definitely have an opportunity to not only get grants, but also to work with other volunteers within the network. The Super Stewards program, they do receive special training and tools from park staff. It was great. When I completed it, I did get a bag. Not that I'm here for the swag, but I always love getting some tools. So it was great to be able to walk away and have tools and really get into the work immediately. And besides the tools that you get when you finish, they provide resources, support after as you're doing events. They have what is called a tree LC. We environmentalists really love the puns, but they can bring a truck full of mulch to any event that you're doing. Again, it just requires some planning with the Super Steward program, but incredible, incredible resource. And again, free to the public. Forest for All, another incredible, I can't say organization. This is really a coalition, but incredible resources for all New Yorkers in and around the urban tree canopy. The goal right now is to achieve a 30% tree canopy in the city by 2035. I think we might have someone on here. We'll wait for Q&A. I can't go through it all now, but Sergio might be on here and be able to speak to some of what Forest for All does, and also Trees New York, and also probably all of these, to be honest. But Forest for All, I'm lucky myself to be part of this coalition. It is robust, a lot of different organizations really working to think about how we can justly and equitably really deliver the benefits of trees to the city, mitigating climate change. So it's again an incredible coalition. I highly recommend everyone check it out. And that's the agenda. So we're going to get into just resources. These are some of the groups we have worked with and know about in different boroughs. We love hearing about more. So by all means, please drop in the chat and we will keep note and reach out. If you're part of an organization, please send us an email. If you'd like to do something with us, send us an email. There are so many people doing this work, and sometimes it feels like it's all over the place. Our goal here was really to bring it all together. Again, you will get a copy of this as a PDF. You will see all of these sources and branch out to us. This is our email address for myself, Gil, and L'Oreal. You're welcome to email us at any point with any questions. Be patient with the response, but we will definitely respond to you. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you figure out, next steps or, support if you are in a district that we're funded by and do work with you. We love it, and that's why we're here doing it. So that is our agenda for today. And I think oh my gosh, we're perfectly on time. That's incredible. That never happens. So again, just a big thank you to you for being here. The fact that you're here shows a really next level of commitment and interest in this work. Feel free to follow us on Instagram and, of course, funding our work so that we can continue doing it, working especially in more districts that we may not yet be funded in, and just spreading this. So, yeah, and of course, a big thank you to MillerKnoll for generously, funding this workshop in addition to the first one. So that being said, we are going to open it up to questions. My colleague Gil Lopez has joined us as well, and he is a resident expert. We're going to spotlight him and add him into the conversation so that he can also contribute, because there are definitely things that, we all have different understandings of. But I'm happy to pause, and L'Oreal, if you know some questions that have already been shared, or if anyone just wants to share, please, this is the time. Gil, I'm sorry, go ahead, L'Oreal.
The questions are just trickling in the chat, so I can read them off, or if you have a look, they're in there as well.
Perfect. So I'm going to read them off. Gil, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. I'm going to add you to the spotlight here if you want to introduce yourself, and I'll start going through the questions.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gil Lopez. I've been working for Big Reuse since 2017. I started with the compost project, and now we have our street tree care, compost application, environmental education. I'm actually out today planting trees, exciting new program that we're doing. I'm happy to be able to join for a little while and try to answer some of these wonderful questions that I see coming in over the chat. Let's see here. I see the first one that I saw was about root-bound trees in beds. I don't know if that's the first one.
Yeah, Gil, if it's cool with you, I'm gonna read them out and we can answer them together. I'm gonna, try to gauge these for you. I know you're in the field. So that being said, the first thing was about trees and small root-bound beds, and if there's anything that can be done and if it can be reported to parks. If you're happy, you can go ahead, kick off.
So I believe that what Parks is doing is trying to, so the minimum size for a tree bed nowadays is 5 feet by 10 feet. So a lot of tree beds are actually much smaller than that. That used to not be the case. So a lot of these trees are in much smaller beds, and as the tree grows, and because it doesn't have its entire drip line times two to gather rain and nutrients, the roots come to the surface right in the tree bed, and they become what is referred to here as root bound. Root bound is a little bit different. That's when the tree roots go around in circles and girdle themselves and choke itself out. But when these beds are full of roots at the surface, that's generally not a good sign. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of urban street trees. Um, you can report it to Parks. It's not, I don't know that it's going to do too much. Parks, I believe, will be coming and trying to expand tree beds at some point, but that is not a high priority. Right now, their priority is to start in the fall, in the spring, planting new trees in areas that have been identified with a high heat index and flooding problems. So expanding trees is not on the high priority unless it's in one of these areas with a high heat index or flooding problems. And then they're going to be replacing empty tree beds, replacing trees and empty tree beds, cutting new beds that are the standard 5 by 10, and planting in them, grinding stumps from old trees that have died, and replanting there. But this isn't really a huge priority for Parks to help out trees that are bound otherwise, unfortunately.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you. I want to clarify one question. The reason I don't recommend a street tree event during Earth Month, it's not that I don't recommend it. They're great and I highly recommend it. What I was saying was that everyone likes to do events during Earth Month. And what I'm encouraging everyone to do is to do events year long, that they don't just need to be during Earth Month. It's the popular time, it's a trendy time. I'm saying that I would like everyone to kind of evenly distribute tree events throughout the year. So, of course, I recommend doing it during every month, any month, but specifically just that you don't have to only do it during Earth Month. I apologize for not being clear.
I'll
Gail, I
add to
got
that
another.
and say,
I'm
if
sorry.
you want support for a tree care event, if you want to do it around Earth Day or Arbor Day, you need to ask uh, folks like us or Trees New York, or other Lower East Side Ecology Center, other groups that support tree care work, like now, because we're starting to get booked up for those times now. But we would love to work with you before then so that you could do those events by yourself. We want to see as many events happening on Earth Day, on Arbor Day, during Earth Month as possible. But we are a small but mighty crew, but we can only be one place at a time.
Well said, Gil. Well said. Thank you. And I will add to that and let you know that as someone on the programming side, I have already started planning things and gotten requests for March and April. So it really just books up incredibly quickly. Thank you, Gail. I love hearing this, just sharing that someone, really got a lot from it. Cherie, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but it's really great to hear. Pamela asks if you have slightly soapy water, can you reuse that for the tree bed? Um, yes, slightly soapy, especially if that's a biodegradable or kind of health conscious soap. I don't know, that's perhaps subjective to say health conscious, but as long as it's not a super toxic or concentrated soap, I think it's fine to use. Gail, L'Oreal, would you have anything to add to that?
It's probably fine.
Okay.
Um, as soaps are sometimes used as pest deterrents, sprayed on the
That,
crops.
yeah.
Again, organic, naturally decompose, like
Biodegradable.
biodegradable soaps. No harsh detergents, chemical detergents, nothing like that.
Okay, great. In terms of a way, the famous question, is there an effective way to discourage dog owners or dog walkers from using tree pits? Signs are great. We all know that they're not as effective as possible. What I encourage you to do is that if you do see animals of any kind of defecating, especially with urine, is to go ahead and bring out water right after to dilute it. In small parts, there's actually some nutrients that could be good, but it's just the concentrated amounts. So really, if you do see it, and I know this wasn't the question, but I just want to emphasize this as well. A physician actually attended one of our workshops recently and came up after and shared this great. She said, if you're sick, you take 2 aspirin, you don't take the whole bottle. So it's this idea of, just diluting the entire, right? That 2 aspirin would be okay, but a bottle would kill you. So it's understanding of diluting whatever, dog waste is coming through that tree bed and adding water to help dilute it. Gail, L'Oreal, do you have any other effective ways to discourage dog walkers?
Tree guards are really great. Uh, Oftentimes having things planted in the tree will discourage some people. Some people just don't care and they're just rude. And there's not much of anything that you can do to discourage them. And just education, and it's not necessarily on us as individuals, but kind of is. So having signage, letting people know that urine and feces is bad for the tree. And I will just echo what Annalisa just said, that urine actually has a lot of nutrients in it. And it's actually a fertilizer when it's diluted with water, but when it's not diluted, it can do harm.
Fabulous. Thanks. Connie asked a really great question. What time of the year is the best to prune trees?
So that one definitely depends. It depends on what your purpose of pruning is. If you're pruning because there's a branch that's like poking people in the eye every time they walk or bike past, any time of the year is the best time to prune that. If you're pruning because you want to limit the amount of growth, um, like late summer, early fall would be pretty good. If you're pruning because you want to increase the amount of new growth, uh, early spring is preferable. If you're pruning a fruit tree, you really need to pay attention to what type of tree it is. But most, if not, fruit trees aren't really allowed as street trees, so I won't go into that, and I don't really have all the knowledge to really
Gil,
tackle
they,
that one to begin with.
Gil, they just clarified pruning for dead branches.
Oh, dead branches you can prune out just about any time. If you want to try to get the branches to grow back, pruning them out in early spring and pruning just back to where you see a little bit of green wood.
Fabulous. Thank you. This is a great one, and it's close to our hearts because we get this question a lot. And I'm sorry I didn't speak to it explicitly, but there are some tree beds that had a tree at some point, but that tree is long gone now. Since then, homeowners have bricked over those pits. Are there any actions that I can take to help reclaim those tree pits for street trees beyond reporting it to parks?
Um, Not really. I don't think so. I mean, parks would be the agency that would have jurisdiction over there. If it's not in front of your property, then not sure that you can just go and do a voluntary tree planting. If it is in front of your property and someone has bricked it over, then of course you can remove the bricks and plant a tree. You need to get a permit, but you can do what's called a voluntary planting. You can do it yourself, or you can hire a tree service company to plant a tree in that for you. But
And
if it's in front of somebody else's property, there's not much you can do. You're gonna have to wait for parks to take care of it.
and what's kind of being said but not explicitly is just that where that tree is or where that tree bed is really important. So becoming familiar and comfortable and friendly with the people who might reside and or own the property that is sharing that space is really important, again coming back to the theme of community and togetherness and community. Next question, Sarah asks, is there any good way to advocate for street tree care and attention from parks? We would like to advocate and are in a high heat index area.
Fortunately, Parks Department's budget is less than they actually need to take care of their parks. So they don't really have a budget, much of a budget for street tree care outside of their stewardship program. So the best way to advocate for the trees in your neighborhood is to become a Parks certified street tree steward and to request to gather your neighbors and and schedule a work day with the park stewardship team. They come out with tools and a truck full of mulch and trash bags and stuff like that. And and then work with the parks crew to take care of those trees. Again, they're a very small group, just like me and Annalisa and L'Oreal. They only have a few people on their team and they can only be at one place at a time. So they only do a couple tree care events a weekend, so you want to get on their calendar early. And the other thing you can do is if you see any rallies or calls to contact your elected officials to get parks more funding, if they had funding, they could probably do more care for these street trees. But right now the funding is the major limiting factor.
Thanks, Gil. There's a question about a minimum amount of mulch that you can request for your trees. I don't think there's a minimum. Gil, correct me if I'm wrong. This is from Betsy, who actually said they did an event with you that was awesome. And we bring a lot, of course, we bring a lot because we try to do as much as we can in those 2 hours. Like Gil said, funding is a huge issue. So we really try to make our events go as far and wide and long as possible. But I don't believe there's a minimum amount. But it is an issue, right? Not having a car or a place to store mulch. Again, just getting really familiar and comfortable with your super. Can't say enough to just making connections in your building. But Gil, is there anything you would add to that?
We don't really just deliver mulch. If we're going to show up and we're going to run a street tree care event, I'm going to be in the box truck, or me or L'Oreal are going to bring 9 toters because that's what we can. If we're doing 2 events in a day, we can fit 9 toters per event in the truck. And that's just what we bring. If you don't want to use all of that, that's fine. If we don't use all of it and you want us to dump some of it somewhere so you can use it later, that's fine. But it's really, we don't have the staff or the trucks to like go deliver just 1 or 2 toters of mulch to different people in different neighborhoods right now. That said, you can go to Greenwood Cemetery and they have a spot where they pile mulch up and you can just go and pick some up. You can just bring buckets or bags, and you have to either drive or hope that an Uber driver doesn't get too upset with you bringing buckets and bags of mulch in a car with you. But Greenwood Cemetery is an excellent resource. They don't deliver unless that you can take a 20-yard dump truck full. They would possibly deliver, but you can go pick up just a few bags of mulch. And it really just takes 2 or 3 bags to take care of one large tree bed.
Thanks, Gail. Any ideas? What can you speak to spraying mint oil to keep dogs from defecating in tree pits? I've heard of mint oil for rodents. I don't know. Gil, any?
I haven't heard about that for dogs. I also have heard that rats don't like mints, but I don't know about the dogs.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. So unsure. If you are putting any kind of oil, even if it's natural, just again dilute it. The smell will come through. But putting, anything concentrated in your tree bed, just being aware of it, and again, not on the tree itself. I think it's obvious, but I'm just going to say it anyway. The next question from Connie: what are your thoughts on stringing the tree pit with monofilament to get the dogs out? So putting essentially like a synthetic fiber, right? All around the
Fishing line.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I've seen that before. Like people put fishing line or something on the top, like making this like booby trap essentially to make it like to freak dogs out. Um, I've also seen like crinkle wrap or something that when dogs walk on it, it crinkles and it sounds weird. Um, it might work, it might be effective, and you're also putting trash in the landscape. So just be aware of that. Maybe replace it every once in a while because it starts to degrade and break, and then little pieces of plastic and trash end up in your tree bed. Um, yeah.
Thanks, Gil. Michael shared that a sign, especially if it's written in a kid's handwriting, is helpful. So a little guilt, but not guilt. I agree that that's always a way to get straight to someone's heartstrings. Sarah wrote, "We understand that we have too much dirt in some of our tree beds, and we want a way to show everyone how high the soil and mulch should be in the bed. I always say it should be flush with the sidewalk. Gil, I'm happy if you want to step in and add anything to that."
Yeah, flush with the sidewalk, but really you want to take special attention to the base of the tree. What's called the trunk flare is where the trunk goes into the ground and turns into the roots. The trunk has bark on it and the roots generally do not. The trunk flare will widen a little bit, or there might be a little bulb out. Um, Depending on the type of tree, there might even have these little kind of fingers going in kind of different directions. But really trying to discern where the roots end and the tree trunk starts. And that should be the level where the soil comes up to the tree. Sometimes it's a little higher or a little lower than the sidewalk. Um, but uh, Generally, if it's lower than the sidewalk, filling whatever negative space with mulch is a great idea, but not filling it up with soil. And if it's higher than the sidewalk, tapering it slightly, sloping it down to the sidewalk or just an inch below the sidewalk so that water can come into the bed and fill that negative area and be like a reservoir um, around where the concrete is holding it into the bed when it rains.
Fabulous. And we have one more question. I also do want to invite Sergio, who I see is on the call. Right before Sergio, we're going to come to you in a moment and spotlight you. But the last question for now is from Michael. I see some cement chunks on some tree beds, presumably for rats. I know those are blocking rainwater and generally ugly. What could be a plan of action there?
So, um, you have to. We definitely don't want the rats. We don't want rats on our sidewalk. We don't want rats living in the tree bed. They're probably down there gnawing on the roots of the tree. So whatever we can do to get rid of the rats is great. There are more aesthetically pleasing options than just big chunks of concrete or urbanite. Um, I think that using like a medium-sized stone, either like a marble chip or like some sort of gravel, and packing any rat burrows that you see with that. And then, of course, they're going to make another burrow. You pack that burrow with more stone, and you just continue to persistently perturb them from burrowing into your tree bed. Whereas if you put just like a big concrete chunk on top of their burrow, they're going to go next to the chunk and just burrow another one. And you could end up putting another concrete chunk, and then you just have a bunch of big concrete chunks that they're squeezing through the cracks of. And it creates kind of like a little den for them between and underneath these concrete chunks. But if you use smaller aggregate, smaller stones, um, stones are actually a mulch. They're an inorganic mulch, like unlike there's a mulch similar to wood chip, but the wood chip is organic. It will degrade and it will feed the soil over time. And stone won't degrade, but they will still block the sun, retain moisture under the soil, and block weeds from coming up. But the advantage of stone is that they also when the rats try to burrow under or around it, the stone just resettles back under around, and it gives the rats a really hard time. So they eventually will move on and stop trying to burrow in your bed. But I personally don't like concrete or urbanite in the trees. Whenever I do a street tree care, I always take concrete or urban asphalt or, you know, any sort of man-made material like that out. I'll leave stones, like natural stone, but I'm always trying to get rid of the concrete.
Thanks, Gail. I also want to just hand it over right now. That was the last question, although there might be more for everyone to meet Sergio. I know Sergio personally through the Forest for All New York City Coalition, which he helps lead. Incredible wealth of information. Was also at our first workshop in person. Oh, you're getting all the applause. Sergio, please introduce yourself and welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Annalisa. Hi, I'm Sergio. I am the manager for Forest for All NYC. We are a growing coalition of 162 member organizations. So we're not a 501c3. We're not a nonprofit of our own, but we bring the expertise of 162 members, which range from government, from academia, from nonprofit organizations, and from many of the business improvement districts, for example, that you are in. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things that may be of interest to this crowd. One, we spearheaded an effort to get the city to want to establish that goal of 30% canopy cover throughout New York City by, they did not commit to 2035 as we had hoped, but they had set that goal, and they also, as we had advocated for, they are centering equity and environmental justice as part of this effort. And as part of what we do, we not only advocated for that law that mandated that the city create an urban forest plan for that, which is being drafted right now as we speak. And you may want to just Google Urban Forest Plan NYC, and there you'll see a couple of news items that came out in the last couple of days. We also advocate in terms of helping our partners at New York City Parks for the budget for New York City Parks, the Department of Parks and Recreation, to be much robust than what it is right now. Parks tends to be the one agency that gets cuts when the city has financial problems. And that has been the case for decades. And they're doing a fantastic job with the little amount of funding that they have. So if you want to get involved, follow Forest for NYC on social media. And also our partners at Play Fair, which is a coalition being led by New Yorkers for Park, is another great source as well. And in terms of events too, we have something called City of Forest Day every fall, generally at the end of October. And that is an opportunity for local groups or local individuals to put together events. And we provide a lot of the help in like how to socialize your event, how to organize it. This past November 26, we had 85 events throughout all the 5 boroughs, bringing in around 1,100 individuals. So consider that as something that you can also organize. In addition to, or maybe instead of a Earth Day, which becomes this really, really clustered with events. And I think that's about everything I wanted to say. Thank you, Annalisa, L'Oreal, and Gail for putting this together.
Thank you. And thank you, Sergio, for coming and volunteering to kind of join us and share not only about Forest for All, but great resources. The City of Forest Day, of course, is October 26th. You can check that out. It was incredible. I think this year more than over 90. Is that right, Sergio? Over 90. I'm not going to misquote the number, but events across all 5 boroughs, which is just, it's phenomenal. Again, another great organization doing so much to get out there. We are going to close with one final question from Mary Kelly. It's a follow-up for you, Gil, on what you were speaking to about the rat annoyance stone sizes. So Mary Kelly says, what size of stones are you recommending for the rat annoyance? In my community garden, we used pebbles that were not effective at all. I'm sorry, not at all effective. Are you suggesting stones that are perhaps 2 to 3 inches? The smaller pebbles, smaller than 1 inch, were no deterrent at all.
I would say about a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches. You could go a little bit larger, but really what you want to do, this isn't just something that you're spreading around the ground. When you see a burrow, you're packing it in. You put some stones in there and you ram them in with like the end of a garden tool or like a smaller stick or something like that. And you get as many stones as you can into that hole. It's not, you're not going to deter rats by just having stones on the ground. You're actively packing burrows with these stones.
Thanks, Gil. And again, if anyone has follow-up questions, please feel free to email and reach out to us. Martha asked if next year's Forest of Day is October 26th again, and it will be, Sergio just confirmed, around that date, but it hasn't been set yet. So
We may make it a weekend too, so it could be a City of Forest weekend rather than day.
That's pretty exciting. Thank you all. I mean, it's really wonderful in the chat to hear you all thanking us, but I don't like speaking on behalf of other people, but I am going to speak on behalf of my colleagues and say thank you. You're all here taking 2 hours out of your weekend afternoon to learn more and to push to understand this better. There's a lot here. I mean, look at this agenda that we went through. It's kind of crazy. So thank you for all that you do and for caring to take this next step in really figuring out how to best care for our urban environment and trees in general. So with that, we bid you adieu. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and your Saturday. And thank you again for coming. And again, we hope to be in touch with you in any and all ways.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Enjoy your fall.
Take care.
Bye, folks. Thanks for joining.
Oh, hey. More people still want to hang out with us.